So today we're going to talk about the amazing novel The Trial by Franz Kafka. The Trial was first published in German as Der Prozess in 1925, although Kafka had written it between 1914 and 15. The Trial is considered an unfinished novel, which would explain its abrupt ending, but more on that later. Kafka is a writer that if you love literature, you just cannot afford to miss out on. You need to read his fiction, there's just no way around that. You need to read at least The Metamorphosis and The Trial. My name is Juan and I run Bookish Islander, and today I'm going to discuss The Trial by Franz Kafka. Apart from here on YouTube, you can also follow me on Twitter or Instagram at Bookish Islander, particularly if you would like to contact me about anything book related. And I am also on Goodreads. If you want to keep up with my reading, you can follow me on there. So here on YouTube, I post a new book review every Saturday, but I also occasionally make other kinds of book related content that get published on other days of the week. And today I'm going to try to review The Trial, which is one of the biggest challenges I've faced so far on this channel. So let's take things easy and begin by talking a little bit about its author, Franz Kafka. Why is he considered one of the most renowned writers in world literature? So here we go. Franz Kafka was born in 1883 and died in 1924, and that means that he was born in the late 19th century and lived through many changes and global events, including World War I. And he was right in the middle of it because he was born in Central Europe, specifically in Prague. Now, today, Prague is the capital of the Czech Republic, as you know, but when Kafka was born, Prague was the capital of the Kingdom of Bohemia, which was part of the much larger Austro-Hungarian Empire. Franz Kafka belonged to the German-speaking Jewish middle class. That means that German was his first language, which explains why he wrote in German and not in Czech. He might have also known some Yiddish, but even if he did, he spoke and wrote in German. Now, the ethno-linguistic makeup of the Austro-Hungarian Empire was complex, so I am not going to get too much into it here, but I think it is relevant to point out that although German was the official language of the empire, together with Hungarian, or at least German was the language that had the most prestige, most people in Bohemia spoke Czech and not German. However, the Jewish minority spoke Yiddish and or German, and by the way, Yiddish, as you probably know, itself derives from German. The main difference is the writing system, because Yiddish uses the Hebrew alphabet while German uses the Latin alphabet. Now, Kafka must have spoken Czech in his everyday life, but he was educated in German. His whole schooling was in German. It would have been possible for him to be schooled in Czech. He could have even gone to a Czech language university, but the language of social mobility for Jewish people in the Austro-Hungarian Empire was German. So it makes sense that he or his family would have chosen German. Now, Kafka lived through the last decades of the empire to its dissolution in 1918 after the Great War, when the empire broke up and was succeeded by several kingdoms and republics, including the First Czechoslovak Republic, or the Republic of German Austria. I think this is all relevant to understand the kind of world that Kafka lived in and why he wrote the kind of fiction he wrote. To say that the Austro-Hungarian Empire was unstable during Kafka's lifetime is probably an understatement. There was a lot of tension between the different nationalities within the empire. Several assassinations took place, including that of the Empress Elizabeth by an Italian anarchist in 1894, and later, of course, that of the heir to the throne, Archduke Franz Ferdinand, and his wife in Sarajevo, which directly led to World War I. So that is the context in which Kafka grew up. Now, the most important figure in Kafka's life as a writer is his best friend, Max Brod, who encouraged him to write. Max Brod also wrote a biography of Kafka and was responsible for publishing his work after the writer's death. So it is thanks to Max Brod that we can now read The Trial, among other books by Kafka. Kafka actually wanted everything he left unpublished to be burned upon his death, but luckily for us, Brod refused, and not only did he not burn the manuscripts, but he also published them. It is also relevant to mention that most of Kafka's works were published posthumously, so after his death, but some, like the Metamorphosis, were published during his lifetime. Now, not everything that Kafka wrote survived. Some manuscripts were destroyed by Kafka's lover, Dora Diamond, for instance, also part of the writing that survived, letters and such, has not been published yet. Okay, I think that's probably enough about the context, so let's go into the novel itself now. So The Trial is considered by many to be Kafka's masterpiece and one of the most important works of fiction in the world. The Trial is not an easy novel to read for several reasons. The world of the novel is dominated by dread and the reader feels that on almost every page. So even though it is a short novel, every time I read it, I need to take breaks every so often. And that is why I wouldn't recommend reading The Trial in one sitting. This novel is difficult and you should know that before you read it, even though you should not be put off by that, okay? Another element that makes this novel difficult is that it is unfinished, as I said earlier. The Trial is not only unfinished because Kafka stopped writing it and didn't give it a proper ending. The novel does have a clear ending, only that perhaps it happens too abruptly. But no, The Trial is unfinished because some of the chapters are unfinished. And then there's also the question of the order. The order in which the chapters are placed was decided by Max Brod and not by Kafka, who apparently left the manuscript for each chapter in a separate envelope. So it was up to Brod to decide what the right order should be. Because of the incompleteness and the issue of the order, there are some incoherences in the text that only make it more difficult to read. My approach to reading The Trial consists of not getting too hung up on the inconsistencies and read on until the end, but always taking breaks when the oppressive atmosphere or some of the absurdities in the plot get to be too much. The Trial probably would make more sense if Kafka only could have finished it. Now, in the novel, the main character is Joseph K., a bank clerk, who one morning gets arrested. He doesn't know why he's being arrested or even what he is being accused of. From that moment on, his life will begin to disintegrate and he will never be the same again. The Trial is one of the most terrifying books I have ever read, but to go deeper into the novel, I'll have to go into the plot. So if you haven't read The Trial yet or don't want to hear any spoilers, you should probably stop watching this video right now, because between now and the end of this video, I am going to talk about the plot of The Trial and some of its themes in a lot more detail, and there will be some spoilers. So if you don't want any spoilers, you have been warned. You should stop watching now, and I'll see you again, I hope, for another book review. Okay, for those of you who are still here, I am now going to summarize the plot of The Trial. There is actually not a lot of plot, so I think summarizing The Trial is not challenging and it won't take me long at all. So The Trial is basically a year in the life of a young bank clerk named Joseph K. The novel narrates his life between the morning of his 30th birthday, when Joseph K. is arrested by two policemen, and the morning of his 31st birthday a year later, when two policemen come again. This time they take Joseph K. to a quarry and kill him in the name of the law. The novel narrates the year between those two events. Joseph K. never learns what he's being accused of and he struggles to understand what is going on throughout. Now, summarizing the plot of The Trial is easy enough. What is a challenge is trying to interpret the novel. Now, is The Trial a critique on bureaucracy? Maybe Kafka was satirizing the bureaucracy of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, but most likely there is a lot more to it than that, I think. There is never a trial in the novel, so perhaps we could think of the other sense of the original title. My German is extremely basic, but I think Der Prozess could be translated both as The Trial, which is the title for the English translation, and also The Process. So we can think of this novel as the process of decay in the main character. The life of Joseph K. is in the process of disintegrating in the course of the narrative until he eventually dies. Well, in this case, he's killed. And from the first line of the novel, we know that Joseph K. is innocent, and this is important. He did not do anything wrong. Nonetheless, he's going to have a year from hell and ends up losing his life, and there is no explanation for that. And not to get too somber here, I understand that life doesn't make sense most of the time. Life is absurd. So what surprises me is not that Kafka wrote something like The Trial. What surprises me is why so many other writers have chosen to write fiction, whereas things seem to make sense. Perhaps those writers are trying to help readers escape from the absurdity of life and take solace in the kind of fiction where there is always a neat explanation for everything that happens. Whatever the trial may be about, every time I read it, I get mad at the injustice and can't help but think that many people could see themselves in similar situations in real life and probably do all the time. And I'm not just talking about people who live under authoritarian regimes. Injustice, I think, can be committed under any kind of regime, political regime. A lie could ruin a person's life. Even as it happens in the trial, a lie can result in someone's death. The trial is also suffocating. That's why I had to put it down and even let days go by where I didn't read it. Now, the feeling of oppression can be overwhelming. I mean, I hate having to deal with bureaucracy in real life. I avoid it as much as I can. I leave things to the last minute. So the events narrated in the trial are the stuff my nightmares are made of. The trial captures something that I am afraid of. I don't think I could be so terrified if I read a so-called horror novel. What happens to Joseph K. in the trial is something that could happen to pretty much anyone, I think, at least in my mind. I see it as a possibility. And that is what makes it truly terrifying to me. Having said that, for those of you who might still be watching the video but haven't read the novel yet, the only conventionally terrifying thing that happens in the novel is the ending, when Joseph K. gets killed. And I wouldn't exactly recommend the trial to everyone. This is not one of my blank recommendations, but I would recommend the trial to readers who want to read the Western canon, or those who want to read the masterpieces of universal literature. And I would also recommend the trial to readers with a philosophical bent, readers who might also enjoy The Stranger, for example, by Albert Camus, which I have already reviewed here on my channel, so I'm going to link to it in case you're interested. I have also read The Metamorphosis, which I would also recommend. I haven't reviewed The Metamorphosis yet, so let me know in the comment section below if you would like me to review it in a future video. I would say that The Metamorphosis is a much easier book to read in every sense, so if you wanted to dip your toes in Kafka's fiction, I would probably recommend The Metamorphosis over the trial. Some of the problems or difficulties that you'll find on the trial, I think, are absent from The Metamorphosis, a lot more straightforward. Now, I intend to read more by Kafka, but not immediately. I think my next Kafka would probably be The Castle or Das Schloss, but I don't know when I'll get to that. Right now, I think I need to go back to my Russians. If you follow my videos, you probably know that I have recently reviewed the Karamazov Brothers and Crime and Punishment by Dostoevsky. I have more Russian classics on my list of books to read and review in 2021, so I probably should go back to those. And well, if you have made it to the end of the video, thank you. Now, please let me know what you think about all this or any of this in the comment section below. I would love to hear from you. I'm signing off now. This is all from me. I hope that you are all doing very well, and I hope to see you again very soon for another book review. Bye for now.